All right. DAO Talk episode 12. This is DAO Talk, your one-stop shop for everything DAOs. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Frishan.
Let's get into it. Big week. We're going to keep this one nice and fast. We had a lot to cover this week. Just when we were complaining week after week that it's boring and it's the bear market and not a lot of shit's happening, I think we flew a little too close to the sun, and now we have some pretty big news this week. Unless you've been living under a rock, you heard about the U.S. Treasury government sanctions around Tornado Cash. So, Frisian, let's dive right into it.
Yeah, it's getting spicy out there again. It feels like this time last summer, almost exactly, where there is a ton of regulatory conversation because they snuck a bill into the spending package that made like wallets and crypto exchanges brokers under the law and imposed a bunch of impossible to follow or adhere to tax requirements. And the NFT market was going insane. So this time it's a different regulatory challenge, equally serious, if not more so. And that is the fact that the Treasury Department put and like the U.S. government put Tornado Cash, which is an open source, privacy-focused crypto asset mixer, on the official OFAC sanctions list. And then the market is heating up again, too, around the merge, which we'll talk about as well. So it feels really similar. So would love to dive into what we're seeing here with Tornado Cash. So first of all, this is an unprecedented move from the U.S. government. They have never sanctioned open source software before. There is sort of like a relatively strong argument that this is unconstitutional and illegal because there's sort of like previous case law / rulings that say that code is speech and like therefore open source code would be sort of protected by the Constitution. It's also very serious because if you follow the logic of this, they're basically saying, okay, Tornado Cash has been used by people on the sanctions list, like North Korea, to mix funds after hacks. Therefore, we're sanctioning the software. It's really not that hard to extend that logic to like anything that touches Tornado Cash, like anyone who's ever received any wallet, any address, any application that's ever received funds from Tornado Cash. And then the next step after that is Ethereum. Like, it's like you could use the exact same logic to be like, we should just put all of Ethereum on the sanctions list. So the biggest fallout from this that we've seen so far is that USDC, or Circle, which manages the stablecoin USDC, which is sort of like this highly adopted stablecoin that is run by a regulated centralized issuer called Circle, that has one-to-one backing with real-world assets, is starting to freeze funds. It froze all the USDC funds in Tornado Cash, and there's like more potentially coming. I think some people have been calling out this risk. Here we see Sassel talking about, back in June, like just be aware that like USDC is centralized and Circle may be forced by the government to freeze funds in certain cases. And then we have Jeremy Allaire, the CEO, saying not accurate. Turns out it was accurate. They absolutely froze froze USDC at the behest of the US government. They froze USDC that is in Tornado Cash. So I think there's going to be a lot more fallout that comes from here. We're seeing, so the most interesting things that we've seen so far this week as like a second order effect of this is we're starting to see some applications freeze funds as well. So DYDX has frozen several accounts, presumably like people think kind of based on the fact that the funds may have interacted with Tornado Cash in the past, or the wallet address may have. DYDX, it's a sort of like a single collateral system that is USDC. So like all margin in DYDX, which is a decentralized derivative exchange or on-chain it's a self-custody derivatives exchange that lives on an Ethereum layer 2 app chain. Like it's all the margin, all the accounts are held in USDC. So they're very exposed to this regulation. And then the most interesting thing, like as we're starting to see kind of apps be forced into action, we're seeing Circle be forced into action to freeze funds by this sanction. It came out actually this morning that MakerDAO is starting to have a conversation about moving away from USDC entirely because this is such a severe regulatory risk to them. Now, this is a big deal because DAI is one of the most, it's one of the most valuable assets in crypto. I think it's, I don't know, like $6 or $7 billion of DAI in circulation. It's a top 20 crypto asset by market cap. Maker has some of the most, it might even currently have the most TVL of any DeFi app. It's OG DeFi. It's the most decentralized DAO on Ethereum. Like there's no centralized entity, et cetera, et cetera. So like really important project. But we've talked about this in past episodes. They have had, they have had a philosophical debate since the very beginning of MakerDAO over whether to include real world assets in the protocol. A real world asset is any like crypto asset where there's some sort of like liability to something in something non-crypto. So USDC is a real world asset, right? Because it's backed by like Treasury bonds and stuff like that. Which are not crypto assets. Then they're implementing this real world asset lending program where they're trying to like figure out how to integrate with like the US financial system and the global financial system and provide loans, on chain, but where like they're leveraging Maker's technology, but there's also sort of this like legal backing to it as well. And because Maker has gone this direction, they now have like significant exposure to regulation. So more than half of the collateral that backs DAI is USDC. It's like 50+%. And if Circle were to like freeze those funds for any reason or freeze some portion of them, it could potentially collapse DAI. Like it could completely depeg DAI and collapse all of MakerDAO. And they apparently are taking this risk seriously now. So Rune is the founder of MakerDAO. He's sort of like has the most political clout and like power in the DAO.
On that, this was not something that is like just happened today or happened when this was something that was spoken about pretty prominently on Twitter wasn't it like a big deal when Maker moved towards using USDC as a form of collateral, and people kind of pushed back on that and raised the flags and raised warnings about this potentially happening down the line, bringing it back to kind of a DAO perspective. I think if you're listening to this, you understand the ins and outs of why this is a big deal in regards to Tornado Cash and the sanctions, outside of just I feel like the government used the Korean thing you brought up as a way to justify these sanctions without truly knowing what the actual effects of that are. But from a DAO perspective, I think the Maker situation is timely to talk about today because it's not a direct effect of it. I mean, I guess it is a direct effect of those sanctions, but this brings up a bigger issue of these concerns were brought up when the current situation they're trying to unwind or get out of was, put into place, and why was that ignored and why was that not thought about way earlier on?
Well, I don't think it was ignored. I think it's been debated aggressively.
Maybe not
since,
ignored, but
the very beginning of MakerDAO, right? And the group that is passionate about this real world asset approach won, basically. They sort of their vision kind of won out. So I think so to taking a step back, why did it win? And then why did the market adopt DAI after knowing that was the approach that was taken, right? And I think it actually comes back to I actually think this is basically like, this is a bit of a step, but I would actually characterize this as additional fallout from the bull market. Basically, it's much more possible to sort of like grow faster, acquire more collateral in like a near term, more stable way if you use USDC. And like this real world asset approach is like very risky from a regulatory perspective and perhaps just risky in general. And the market was very tolerant of those things, you know, during the bull market. There are two sort of, I guess, established-ish stable coins on Ethereum that have absolutely no exposure to USDC or real-world assets at all. One is called LUSD, which is run by a project called Liquidity. And then the other is Rye, which is run by the Reflexor project. We talked about them before. They use Tally for like the very limited governance that they kind of have in place. And those assets like were not adopted. They were not adopted in the way that DAO was, right? So it's not just about MakerDAO making this decision. Like the market made this decision. Like everybody be using USDC. Everybody using DAI. Yeah. It's obvious that DAI is backed by USDC. Like it's all on chain. It's published all the time. All these reports that MakerDAO does. So like, you know, I think this falls into the camp of just like the market underestimating regulatory risk. And now the people who took a more principled approach to like, we don't want exposure to real world collateral are looking smart, because like literally it looks like MakerDAO is being like, they're like being forced to capitulate. Like this is serious, man. They're basically like, we're going to take more than half of our collateral that backs DAI and change it from USDC to ETH on like a $5 to $10 billion stablecoin. Like this is crazy,
right?
man.
Like there's no other option though, right? Like,
I mean, they could keep going and be like, maybe the government circle won't be forced to freeze any of the USDC.
Yeah, but that's more risky, right? Like, would you agree?
I mean, that's what Rune's saying here, right? Risk. I think that's right.
It's going to come down to like what the DAO.
I think that's right. Like, as soon as you saw Circle freeze the USDC in Tornado Cash, like, in principle, there is no difference between Tornado Cash and Maker. It's just a protocol on Ethereum, and the government basically passed a law, which is like, that's a whole other thing. Like, it's not like this went through Congress. This is literally some people who work at like the Treasury Department and the State Department being like, new rule, no one can use this. Which I think is like a long term, a huge miscalculation on their part. But in the near term, it's having massive impact. Like, this is the most important regulation that has ever been passed and like put into effect for DeFi and probably for crypto broadly.
Like passed.
Yeah, it's like,
I think passed is like, it was just forced through.
Yeah, passed is the wrong word, but it is it is a recognized like ruling that now all these centralized service providers like Circle have to abide by.
Yeah, like understanding that risk of like, hey, like Circle, whether it's run by people who like, I don't know if Circle wanted to do that, probably not, but like at the end of the day, they're a centralized entity that is forced to comply with the US government. Like simply understanding that is why, like, I don't think Rune is like happily doing this. And I think everyone understands it's extremely risky and ideally like you don't have to do this, but like what, like the other option is like Circle's not like, if a law gets passed that it forces them to, you know, do the same thing to Maker, they're going to do it. Why wouldn't they? Right. Like,
yeah. And the problem is it's a very asymmetric, like Maker's exposure, because if Circle, you know, decides to freeze 5% of Maker's USDC, like that is incredibly impactful. Like, you know, or if they decide to freeze all of it, like it's over. It's over for MakerDAO. Like literally. So yeah, it's like a type of risk. Like it, whether it's unlikely or not, almost doesn't matter. Let's say the odds are 0.1% of Circle freezing, you know, like a large percentage of Maker's USDC collateral. Like it's just not acceptable. It's not an acceptable risk, you know, because it's just over if that happens.
Yeah. I think this is a good time. Like, you know, this is not a MakerDAO podcast, but we do have the Tally newsletter, which is, we have a lot of content, but Tally newsletter is the OG Tally newsletter run by Monet Supply. It's been pretty inactive recently, but I think this is going to change that. And if you want any history or background on Maker and just like DeFi as a whole and stablecoins and how this entire, situation happened, I would go read that. I'll link that in the show notes, and also link some specific additions that will provide better context on that. But we could talk about this for hours, and this literally happened this morning, a couple hours before we started recording. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. We'll be watching it from a governance and DAO perspective, and like watching in the Discord and watching the discussion around it. Twitter is pretty crazy today around all of this. So again, like it's been slow for a while, and then shit just pops off. ETH's almost back to 2K right now. Things are going crazy. It's never a dull time in crypto.
Yeah, the market like shrugging off regulatory risks during a bull market is tradition. It's exactly what happened last summer.
It's like, I saw a tweet. It's like, Tornado Cash saw like record usage the day of the sanctions. It's like degens are going to degen, like tell crypto not to do something, and they're going to do the exact opposite of what you want them to do. So I think like big picture, I saw DC Investor tweet about it, where like a lot of people have been like quote tweeting their predictions from years ago and kind of like dancing on the grave of USDC, which is like cool, but like also like, okay, we get it, you were right. But I think long term, this is, the best. Like, this had to happen in order for people to kind of wake up and understand that, like, hey, a centralized stable coin is not conducive to like DeFi's core values. It opens up a lot of risk, and it's just not great. And you will see that with the name of the week coming on later. Do you want to say anything else about this? So,
this is going to be the most interesting and important thing that has ever gone through DAO governance, because Maker is completely run by a DAO. Like, it's completely on chain. There's no legal entity. So like, this will have to be passed
before you
end to end through decentralized governance. And it's like a complete gutting of arguably the most important DeFi protocol period.
Yeah. For people that don't understand what Maker is, give them like a couple sentences, like what they are and how big they are.
Yeah, so Maker, it's like very complicated and
obviously it's a loaded question. Give like for like a normie listening. It's how do you describe Maker?
Overall, obviously, is their main product is DAI, which is a like ERC20 stablecoin currently pegged to $1 on Ethereum, and then they're starting to bridge to other chains. They have a very complicated mechanism design behind DAI that includes like a borrow lend interest rate protocol where you can borrow or lend collateral like at a floating point interest rate. It's the first DeFi protocol. It existed before we had a word for DeFi. Like, it's old. It's one of the very first things. It was the first
magic
application to get product market fit on Ethereum.
Yep. What is like the total like asset value of MakerDAO?
They have a pretty
how much is in circulation? How much DAI is in circulation?
We could go to DeFi Llama and check. I think their TBL is in the like $5 to $10 billion range, and also DAI outstanding is in the $5 to $10 billion range, which like in the current state of the bear market is pretty is a lot. So it's the biggest. Scroll down. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so yeah, they have $9 billion TVL, which I think is the highest DeFi protocol TVL currently. So yeah, this is like the most, you could easily argue it's the most important DAO and the most important application on Ethereum.
Maker wasn't always a DAO.
Yeah, they started off with kind of like the way Ethereum did it, where there's like a foundation, and then they started decentralizing, but they eventually completely dissolved the foundation, and now it's 100% DAO. Like, all governance is on the chain, period.
So we'll keep an eye on this.
Why they invited in so much exposure to the U.S. government in the form of USDC. But yeah, we're about to find out how that's going to play out.
I think that's what, like you said, it wasn't like forced through it, but it was a hot debate about a year ago, right? And there's been a lot of tweets coming up, like I said, quote tweeting, like Amin was talking about it, like quote tweeting his memes or from a year or two ago about USDC and just like, things are not
I'm going
to
take another step back and we should move on. This is the reality is that there is now like active conflict between the US government and Ethereum. Like the US government derives a tremendous amount of power from the fact that they have control over the global financial system. And they leverage that power by doing things like sanctioning countries like North Korea and Iran and stopping them from participating in the global financial system that they control. And the reality is they simply do not have control over Ethereum. Like Iran and North Korea absolutely can use Ethereum to transact. And there's nothing that the US government can do to stop that. What they can do is stop like Americans and their partners from using Ethereum. And so, I think that would be a very short-sighted view on their part, but like you can see why some would probably end up arguing for that approach within the US government, just game theoretically. And so I think like this is the beginning. This is like the first actual shot fired in what's going to be a very, very long, drawn out process of figuring out the relationship between Ethereum and the US government. And I think, more to come.
For sure. Moving right along with Ethereum news, Gurley testnet has successfully merged. That happened last night at around like 8-ish, 9-ish Eastern time, or 9-ish Eastern time. Here's a good tweet from Sassel. If you don't follow him, great Ethereum resource to follow. This is the last testnet before the mainnet merges, correct, Frisian? Frisian is our in-house Ethereum expert. So give us a little bit of a breakdown pretty quickly, like what this means, and we're going to hop right along with some other news, and then we're going to
wrap this. So Gurley was the last testnet. It merged successfully. There are some hiccups. The participation rate on the new blocks from stakers is a little bit lower than would be ideal. There is like some kind of block, like chain reorg that happened, I think immediately prior or like right at the exact same time as the merge. So there will be some learnings, but there is a consensus call this morning, and they basically soft kind of chose a TTD, which is total terminal difficulty for the mainnet merge, that projects it to happen in the August 15th or September 15th or 16th range. So about a month out. It's happening. The merge. Let's go. The market has gone from incredibly boring to insanely spicy so fast. Like this regulatory stuff is crazy.
Yeah, things move fast.
The merge is the second most important event that will ever happen in crypto. Number one, first Bitcoin block produced. Number two, Ethereum merge. Period. So it's going to be fascinating.
Absolutely. All right, let's move into some DAO news. We had DAO Research Collective release a new nonprofit DAO library, which is pretty sweet. Frisian.
Yeah, this is really cool. So the DAO Research Collective is sort of it's a collective of like academics, researchers, people who consume academic research all around DAOs, and it's sort of like a home for that information. So we've talked about how like we're kind of making stuff up as we go along in DAOs. Maybe sometimes we don't take full advantage of like things that have been learned in the past that are applicable, or like maybe some of the fundamental research don't take the time to do the fundamental research, and everyone sort of ends up being a governance expert in air quotes. And so, this is like a one-stop shop for like all of the, kind of foundational research that exists around DAOs. There's also a great forum, so you can like participate yourself. Been meaning to do that. This is like I read the forums, but kind of want to start jumping in on some of the interesting interesting conversation. So I think there's a great resource that'll serve the space really well going forward. I kind of think what we do with content at Tally is kind of like the implementation aspect of this. So this is sort of like academic research, right? And then Tally's trying to like help bridge the gap to like people who are trying to implement the best practices, in DAOs and kind of share what's being learned at that level. So I think there's a pretty strong synergy between this kind of work and what we're doing with content at Tally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, making like we can look at all this and it's great. It's a great resource, but like from a content perspective, if you're not DAO nerds like we are, this might be a little bit boring to you, right? So, I mean, we had an article go out recently or earlier this week that was just about the boring sides of DAO and legal stuff. And Frisian was editing it. I was like, this is, like some of the more boring topics to read, right? But in the right hands and in the right package, right? It's super important information. So this is a great step in helping not only people who need the information, but also for content creators in the space, helping reach the next, million, 2 million, 100 million people in the DAO ecosystem. Guild XYZ, at Guild XYZ on Twitter, had a big announcement this week. Tweet is Guild evolves once again. We are happy to introduce platformless memberships. And this isn't even our final form. A lot of really awesome stuff.
Yeah, this is dope. This is a big product release. So Guild is sort of like it historically has been a very smooth way to instantiate tokenized communities. So they have like, a platform and SDK for, creating like, for people to use their tokens, like join groups on Discord or groups on Telegram, stuff like that. This is like another step where you don't have to have a token. You can use like other services to create groups on Guild that you can then build on top of. So this is actually like very similar to the direction we're going at Tally, where we're trying to let people form a DAO before like they can form a DAO with a token, or if they don't have a token yet, use some way to sort of like create that grouping that they can then build on. So Guild's kind of creating a primitive for this. It's something we're looking at potentially using in our product stack at Tally, and I think is really cool. So jokeDAO built on this and launched like a cool initiative this week where basically if you take certain actions on Twitter, then you can join a group that will then have voting power in jokeDAO, right? So it's just like one example of how this can be used. I think it's, something that is definitely needed and excited to see people use it going forward.
Yeah, something I talk about a lot is like, and I've talked about on previous pods, like what's my biggest gripe or issue with the current, DAO space is user experience and usability, which is arguably the most important part or important problem. That could be applied to every single problem in the DAO space, from governance to just usability of a platform. And Guild has one of the best teams, in my opinion, solving problems like that. So, for instance, like Frisian said, jokeDAO have released kind of like a project to integrate with Guild this week. Frisian and I are both part of it. And as of right now, this recording, there's still 12 more spots to join. So if you want to get involved with this and kind of test it out and see what it's like, go do it. Literally, it's as simple as, it's pretty awesome what Guild's doing. All you had to do to join this group is put jokeDAO Maxi in your Twitter bio, and you connect your Twitter account to Guild, and Guild automatically verifies that you put it in your bio, and it gives you access to the group. So you're seeing right here, if you're watching, all the wallet addresses that are in this group. And the really cool thing is the second you take it out of your bio, it revokes your access. So Guild does not mess around with what they're doing. And the onboarding process, because I'm already in and I'm not going to run through it again because I don't want to risk not getting back in, but it's super, super simple and super, super smooth. So really awesome stuff coming from Guild. And of course, jokeDAO. We love jokeDAO. Some news from Tally. We'll end on this. We had our first space this week. It was a DAOs X media space with some really awesome people from the community. So if you were out there and you were able to come through and listen, we're really happy to connect with you and look out for more of those in the future. Frisian, if you have anything to like say on any of these, just jump in.
No, it was a fun spaces. We talked with cool horse girl from Index Co-op, Lex from Sarah Space, and then we had the Forefront community on the call as well. So great chat about the future of DAOs and media, more spaces from Tally to come.
Yep. Here's we already talked about Gurley, but if you are super interested in like Ethereum content, I would say go follow Frisian. He is pretty up to date on all of that and provides very spicy, unbiased takes. We'll see if he keeps it that way as he becomes super famous on Twitter and he gets more followers and he starts getting sponsored tweets. We'll see if he stays unbiased, but who knows? And then our meme of the week. I'm not gonna let you answer that. Meme of the week. An account maybe we don't love, but the meme is pretty funny. It's the classic meme with the bike, with the guy with the stick, and the first panel is Ethereum community, and then the caption in the second one where he's putting the stick in the wheel is onboard centralized stable coins into all of DeFi, and then the bike falling over, and the caption is fucking regulation. So this is, again, goes back to what we were talking about earlier. This is super important to understand, like, you know, what are the issues, what are the risks of having a centralized stable coin or coins at the center of DeFi. So like, let the paradox of that, or the contradiction of a centralized stable coin in the center of decentralized finance. I think just saying that sentence brings up the core issue of all of that, but will be interesting to see how it plays out. Any final thoughts this week on DAO Talk episode 12?
We're going to keep doing what we do. We're going to keep building amazing DAO tooling and infrastructure. We're going to keep pumping out educational content about DAOs. But while we do it, the market's going to be more interesting. The space is going to be more interesting. So that's fun. But yeah, we got to keep our heads down because, bull or bear, Tally's here to help the space move forward. So let's do this.
Yeah. Again, like something we've talked about internally is like, hey, just because the market is kind of hot again for this week, and who knows what it'll be in the next week or whatever, it's always changing. Keep that bear market mindset. Keep building. Don't get too high. Don't get too low. Stay connected with the people who are building and making you feel like you are doing work that is valuable and contributing to the community as a whole. So yeah, that's it from DAO Talk episode 12, a little short one this week, but a lot going on. If you want to stay up to date, follow at TallyXYZ. We have the DAO Talk newsletter, which is at daotalk.substack.com. I will put that in the show notes as well. Share that with your friends. It is a 5-minute or less recap of everything we talk about on the podcast. That goes out on Monday. We got Tally newsletter, Tally blog, a ton of stuff coming from the Tally team. And again, we'll be here each week on that grind. Frisian, it's been an honor.
Peace.
Peace.